Findings by the OECD show Koreans on average work 1,915 hours every year, the fifth highest after Colombia, Mexico, Costa Rica and Chile, respectively. On Press Perspective today, we touch upon the work culture here and more. Hello and welcome to yet another edition of Press Perspective. It's Friday, January 10th here in Seoul, and I'm Sunhee. Today we touch upon work hours and culture here in Korea amid talk about a possible change in the amount of time we spend at work. For more on this, I have Celio Fioretti, a correspondent for French daily Le Croix. Celio, welcome back.
Glad to be here.
I also have our writer, Colin Marshall, with the pundit's take on broader matters. Colin, as always, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sunhee.
Right, Celia, we'll start with you. Korea currently promotes a 52-hour work week broken down into 40 hours of regular work and 12 hours of overtime, possible overtime, that is. Now, there is talk in the parliament of a potential shift in the work hours, and this appears to have garnered quite a bit of attention by the French media. Tell us more.
Indeed, there has been some coverage about this topic. And for the French, this topic of work time is very important to them. France has been one of the first to decrease the work time from 39 hours a week to 35 hours a week back in 2000, and remain one of the countries with the lowest work time every week, with around 15% less than the OECD average. So for the French, looking at Korea, which is known to be a very hard-working country, as you mentioned, working very long time, not even compared to France, but to the average, it's always appear as a bit strange and raise a lot of questions. It already appears for the French that 52 hours a week seems too much, and talk about increasing it or have it exemption for it for big industries like Samsung, for example, is very much intriguing. Most of the world seems to now talk about decrease the work time. We have seen talks about the 4 days work week, increase the work-life balance, and such, but Korea seems to go on the opposite direction. So of course it gets people attention. Now about the talks at the assembly right now, more specifically the current administration is looking to, and also the industrial sector, are pushing for more flexibility in the work time to allow some sectors of the economy, like as I mentioned, Samsung in the chip industry, to go above the limits to remain competitive against their rival like Japan or the US. The change is already opposed by the Democratic Party, which hold a majority in the assembly. They want to remain on what ex-President Moon Jae-in achieved during his term, which is the current limit in the work time. The main argument is that workers' health, including mental health, as work-life balance is getting more and more important these days, should remain the priority, and that doesn't allow to work past the work time limit. Now, to come back on the French point of view about all this, they are very skeptical that increasing the work time actually make any industries more competitive. Samsung is heavily pushing for this bill about more flexibility in the work time. But if you look at SK Hynix, for example, their main competitor, they have done record profits this year with the current limit of work time. So maybe the lack of competitivity that Samsung is facing this year is not only caused by the work time limit. If you look at France, for example, for the past 30 years, while working less than the other countries in Europe, it has remained one of the most productive countries. So working more doesn't mean products more. And I think that's one way everybody should think about it.
Right, which is why quite a number of people, especially youth here in the country, are also talking about the importance of, as Celia mentioned, work-life balance. Now, this phrase itself, Colin, it gained quite a bit of traction following the COVID-19 pandemic. That being said, how does its presence, perhaps here in South Korea, work-life balance presence, compare to that elsewhere?
Yes, worabe, as the Konglish has it. And the first time I heard that word, or that compound word, I was, as always with Konglish, utterly bewildered. But what could I pabelance? And it's, of course, as you say, become a subject in recent years. And when you think of the effects of COVID-19, the pandemic, on work culture in other countries, well, I can think of the country I'm from, the United States, and you still see a lot of articles, even today, about the effects of the pandemic on how people work, or really more like how they don't work. There's this phrase or these expressions, quiet quitting, where younger workers especially, they don't necessarily quit their jobs, they just sort of stop doing anything, and in many cases can go under the radar without doing a whole lot of work. Or the idea of work from home, which got a lot of traction during the pandemic. People were staying home, still doing their jobs in theory, but this experience illuminated in some ways how little work people were doing when they were at the office, because they could really not do a whole lot at home either and still keep their jobs. And in some cases, they ratcheted down the amount of work they were doing just by being at home. I think we all know nobody's working as much at home as they were in the office, but the question is that a bad thing? Is that a good thing? That's what's still being debated in the US media. In some ways, I'm not the best person to speak on work-life balance because, I mean, I'm a writer. I'm never fully working and never fully not working, never taking a vacation. Even on my honeymoon in Paris for a month, I was working every day. But in the sense, I wasn't working either, if you know what I mean. In Korea, seems to be a harder line between work and life, although that does get violated in various ways we'll talk about. But I think, like a lot of foreign concepts, work-life balance it doesn't transplant neatly into Korean culture. And in some sense, it's a complaint about something other than it sounds like it is. If you feel like you don't have work-life balance, in some cases, maybe many, you may feel like your work itself is not all that valuable. And you're doing it to get the paycheck, to live, that's fine. I work and so I live. And if you have that mindset, you're going to want to balance it. Otherwise, you're getting a raw deal, or you might feel that way.
Right. Colin, as Celio mentioned earlier, Korea is said to be notorious for its workaholic culture. What have you been observing here?
Yes, it sends me back to my early years in Korea when I've never done an actual job in Korea, but I was asked by an acquaintance to take over his job at a publishing company. And I said, okay, tell me a little more. Salary wasn't great, but then he said this, which really put me off. He said, at this company, this Korean publishing company, every day, everyone has to stay until everyone is done. So you finish your work for the day, okay, wait till everyone else does, and only then can you leave. So everybody had to stay until the last person had finished every task for that day. And I thought, no, that's not going to work for me. I'm sure a French person wouldn't say yes to that either. But that's an example, and not even that extreme. You hear worse. You hear of employees of the large conglomerates, the chaebol, getting on the shuttle at 6 in the morning, getting back home at 10 at night, if that, never see their family, maybe on the weekends. But what's worse, I think, than long days in Korea seems to be the fact that you're never really off the clock in many of these jobs. Even if you don't work here, if you have friends who work at Korean companies, they're always, their phone is always ready to receive a call from the boss or a coworker, and they'll pick it up no matter when it is, and they'll go no matter when it is. So you're never not working, in a sense. You're always sort of ready to, you're always sort of waiting for your orders. And that, I think, psychologically has an effect on people even more than the long days.
Right, sadly. Celio, back in 2023, France raised its retirement age to 64, I believe, from 62. This raising of the retirement age was met with much public outrage. Here in Korea, there are plans to raise the retirement age from the current 60 to 65 by the year 2033. And also, according to the OECD, as I mentioned in the clip at the start of our talk, Koreans on average work 1,915 hours. I'm still trying to wrap my head around that figure, while the French work 1,490 hours, if I'm not mistaken, according to the OECD, which means Koreans work 400 hours more than 400 hours more than the French. I'm even losing my voice over this. Culturally speaking, Celio, what are the differences between the workforces of the two countries?
And by the way, on the retirement age reform, it's still a heated debate right now in France at the Assembly. French people are really attached to this almost sacred number of retirement age. Now, as we mentioned just now, Korea and France are very different, almost sometimes opposite in terms of work culture. Korea is one of the countries that works the most. France, one of the countries with the fewest hours by week. And that difference is not only in numbers, it's very deeply cultural, I think. If you look at Korea 50 years ago, it was very poor, and because much Korean worked really hard, it made the country richer. And after all, here on the peninsula, there's no oil, there's no gold, there's only what people can make. So you have to work hard to make any business, make the economy thrive. Now that Korea is rich of its high-tech products and finance economy, the whole situation, the whole atmosphere has changed, but the mindset still remain that we need to work hard to make the country successful. And working less would appear to a lot of people as a kind of lazy attitude. In France, it's quite the opposite. While we also don't have any oil or gold or strategic resources, we have wine in luxury bags. But jokes aside, we haven't been in the same situation as Korea has been through just after the Korean War. So the mindset is different, and people are already in a more relaxed attitude towards work. Even 100 years ago, back in the 1930s, people were already advocating to decrease the work time and have paid leaves. So it's a really long tradition into France to have this separation between life and work. And back in the days, also in the 1930s, this idea of paid leaves was important for French people to spend more time with their family. And I think family and demographic overall is really, I think, what can explain the big difference between Korea and France. France has a lot of immigration, and so it's renewed the population and bring more people every year to work, which Korea hasn't, because the population now is shrinking. It means less people to work. It means you probably have to work longer to compensate this lack of people. And with an aging population like this, it can really explain a lot of the work culture now and probably for the years to come. You can see that family, demographic, and work culture is kind of intertwined. It's all like communicating vessels. It's a very difficult balance to achieve, to have a work culture that allow to increase the birth rate. But I think that's where Korea should put all the efforts.
Right, indeed, because we have the lowest birth rate in the world. It's something that we need to deal with. Colin, staying with findings by the OECD, the presence of women in the Korean workforce continues to hover at the lower end of the OECD spectrum. What would you say are the broader implications of this reality?
I remember I used to hear all kinds of jokes about OECD statistics and that they were just a means of giving Korea a hard time because they would be in the rankings. They just would always be toward the bottom. And that's changed a lot. If you look at the economic stats from the OECD, Korea does quite well. But yes, you have, for example, the birth rate, which is not optimal. I think we can all say that. With a statistic like women's participation in the workplace, it's harder to interpret. You do see arguments that it's, by definition, a bad thing if Korea has fewer women in the workplace proportionally compared to other countries. But this all depends on why, I would say, why there are fewer women. In some countries, you have fewer women because they de-emphasize work outside the home in their lives and put it towards, say, child rearing or something like that, which doesn't show up as an economic statistic. Or, if you have another country where women simply opt out of society, if it's just, I don't want to participate in child rearing or in the economy or anything, then your country might have a problem. So this is a situation where you have to look a little closer at the cause to interpret whether this statistic is good or bad. I mean, this gets brought up as well, the sort of the amount of money that women make versus the amount that men make, the difference in salary. So if that's because women are actually getting paid less for literally the same thing, you've got a problem. If it's an artifact of women making different choices professionally, okay, maybe it's not something we need to prioritize. Maybe let's focus on the birth rate or something, or the suicide rate or something else that's objectively worse. But I think the statistic by itself doesn't tell us a whole lot.
Right. And staying with the broader Korean workforce then, Celio, amid an aging society, which you mentioned earlier, Bloomberg's spoken about how robots are taking or filling the gap in Korea's workforce. What more does this tell us about our current situation? What are the tasks that we face ahead with regard to ensuring a more productive working environment?
Indeed, as a workforce is shrinking, you need to replace those vacant jobs by something. And if it's not new workers, then it could be machine. So what do we do with this? There's a prognostication that South Korea will be the fastest country to integrate robots into the workforce and everyday life also. So far on the factory floors, robots are redefining the way we think about job and how we hire other humans. Human workers are being reassigned to design and planning and managerial status and position, while robots increasingly do the hard labor, working on assembly lines. So far, people are content working alongside robots, even though it's only, for now, only in the big companies, not so much in the small companies. Also, we see more and more in the restaurants now, the serving robots navigating through the tables. Usually, the automation of work raises some question and it worries a lot of people because it could leads to a lot of employment and pay is also issue. What job should robots replace? What happened to the humans that are being replaced by robots? All these questions are getting more and more important, and with the fast development of AI, it will really happen soon, probably. So there's a lot of question about that, and it's not only, we cannot only see it negatively, actually. I will give you an anecdote, but I think it's interesting. It's a nice way of seeing this whole situation. Back in 2017, the socialist candidate for the French presidency, Benoît Hamon, had an idea. Because there's more and more robots in the workforce now, some humans will lose their jobs, and that's a fact. We cannot go against the progress. But he proposed to have a tax on robots with like 10 or 15% of the value they produce. And this money will be given back to the people as a basic income to make people survive. And this idea is not too far-fetched because in the Korean presidential election in 2022, Lee Jae-myung had this idea of basic income. And you can see that, especially in Korea, as the population is shrinking and robots are more and more in the workforce, especially doing jobs that Koreans don't want to do that much anymore, the hard factory work, really demanding and physical. This might be an idea to make everybody happy about this. Robots, yes, will be in the workforce, but not against the humans. It's not an idea of competition between man and machine. So in a society that's looking for a better work-life balance, but also wants to keep its economic status, maybe including robots in the workforce in a way that doesn't affect the human could be a nice way to do it.
Right, robots taking over work, perhaps that is dirty, dangerous and difficult.
Exactly.
You mentioned AI earlier on, Celio. This is an impromptu question. I believe I read somewhere that was saying that AI could perhaps take over 90% of the jobs within the field of journalism. What are your thoughts regarding this? Do you see yourself being replaced? I mean, here at Arirang, we do have AI news taking place as well. What are your thoughts regarding this?
It's interesting. AI has been already in the journalism job for quite a few years now. For all the finance analysis sometimes, or the election results, all this honestly boring job of just writing numbers down have been done now by computers and AI. So in that way, it's good because it gives me free time to do more in-depth reports. Now we see a lot of music critics, for example, made by AI, which is a bit more worrying because when we read a music critic, for example, we want to have the point of view of the author and not the point of view of a computer. So on that side, I think it's really important to we should remain, the human should remain the main writer of the information, because people trust us, sometimes, not always, but people trust us to bring something factual, something that we worked on, and not something that has been brought up by a computer in just 2 seconds.
Right, of course not. And speaking as a writer, Colin, what are your thoughts with regard to the impact of AI on creativity?
Yes, I had some experience recently with it. I never really used any AI tools while writing before, but recently I've been working on a book about Korea's neutro culture, the neutro phenomenon of the sort of revival of the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s culture by younger Koreans to whom it's an exotic new thing, all of this stuff, be it music, technology, pop culture and all its varieties. And I looked up a few examples using AI tools about so when has K-pop used traditional instruments? And when has K-pop drawn on 60s, 70s styles? Because I don't know the world of K-pop that well. So for that specifically, that was a helpful tool to get me started. You can't necessarily trust everything, but on the internet, you can't trust everything anyway. So it was a way to sort of get me going, at least taking the first steps of answering my basic curiosity about just, okay, this world I don't know, K-pop, where should I look? And it helped.
Right, good to know. All right, Colin, I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts, Colin.
Thank you.
And Celia, as always, thank you very much for your insights. Right, well, that brings us to the end of this week's editions of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching and do join us again same time next Monday.